Hello and welcome to the course Basics of Experimental Design for Cognitive Psychologists. I am Dr. Arak Verma from IIT Kanpur. This is the second week where we are getting a bit of an overview of the different kinds of research designs, somewhat superficially before we dive deep into the experimental designs. Last lecture I was talking to you about the very basics of the correlational design, and we basically figured out that it is possible that the variables of interest are related to each other, they are co-varying. The nature of the relationship however can be different. It could be positively linear, it could be negatively linear, it could be just independent where they are not related to each other, or it could be a curvilinear kind of a relationship. So, this is some of the things that we talked about. We also talked a little bit about multiple regressions and correlation coefficients and so on. Now, there are a few things about the correlational research designs that I will also take up in today's lecture before we move on to experimental research designs in the next week. So, how useful are these correlational data, how useful are these correlational research? Now, one thing is sure, and we sort of started with that understanding, that while correlations can provide us with a very good idea about how the two variables are related to each other and that they co-vary, the strength and the direction etc., we get to know from the coefficient, the magnitude, the sign and so on. There are also certain shortcomings of this kind of research. For one, this cannot be used to draw causal conclusions. Okay, this is something very important, which is why experimental research is extremely important, because we cannot really control for anything. We cannot really. So, if you remember when we were talking about multiple regressions, and when we were talking about the fact that there can be 3 or 4 or 5 predictor variables for one outcome variable, that is basically why causality is very difficult. Okay, although multiple regression etc., they are statistical tools to control for other variables while looking for the contribution of your interest variable. We have not really gone out and controlled for certain variables. We have not really gone out and created what is called an initial equivalence and matched the two groups on certain characteristics, so that the effects that we are observing are only because of changes in a variable of interest. So, that is not there, that is not what is done in correlational research. Okay. So, correlations cannot be used to draw conclusions about the causal relationships among the measured variables. We know that is something I just repeated. Hence, even if the research hypothesis indicates that a predictor variable can be used to estimate the outcome variable, the causal relationship is not clear, and the causal relationship is not what is being argued for. How do we interpret? We talked about the R and R square and those kinds of things. How do you make sense of this data? Okay. So, Sanger takes this example where a researcher seeks to investigate the effects of viewing violent television on the propensity to involve in aggressive play in children. So, he is basically saying when children watch violent TV, that is what causes them to behave violently in the school playground, something like that. So, he goes out and collects data. Data is collected from a sample of 4th grade students. Two measures: a measure of how aggressively each child plays on the school playground, and how much violent television shows. Earlier I remember growing up, there were a lot of rather violent cartoons that were there. They were the Fox Kids, so Spider-Man, there were Swat Cats, there were a bunch of these things. And obviously, while they are cartoons and the violence is sort of controlled there, but children used to like WWE and those kinds of things. So, people do watch movies, for example, were also violent, not as violent as today, but was also violent in their own right. So, how much violent TV a child is watching? Does it affect his playground behavior? Does it basically make the child more aggressive, competitive, maybe hurtful to a certain extent? This is basically what we want to check. When they collected this data, they carried out correlations and they find that yes, there is a significant positive correlation between the two measured variables. So, you can think of this as a positive linear relationship. All right. Now, although this positive correlation appears to support the researcher's hypothesis, because there are alternate ways to explain the correlation, it cannot be taken that this is causing that behavior. Okay. The correlation is positive and the relationship seems positively linear. There are alternative hypotheses that are there as well, and because there are alternative hypotheses, it automatically suggests that this is not a causal relationship. So, for example, children might be playing aggressively because something has happened. Maybe their parents have a extremely strict disciplining style. Maybe because there are other things. Maybe there are, say for example, by temperament aggressive. Maybe it could be because, say for example, aggression is rewarded in the school paradigm, something like that. You can think of anything. So, there could also be, in that sense, or actually one of the interesting concepts is that there could be reverse causation. So, what is probably happening is, because they like playing aggressively, because there is competition, because they want to sort of win and be on top, that might be causing their propensity of liking violent TV programs and cartoons and so on. So, one interesting thing is that there could be cases of reverse causation also in the correlations that we are observing. So, it could be possible that children who behave aggressively at the school develop residual excitement, which leads them to watch violent television shows at home. Okay, this is one. Although the possibility that aggressive play cause the increased viewing of violent television rather than vice versa may seem less likely to you, there is, and we cannot rule it because we cannot rule this out, it can be referred to as reverse causation. Look at this: violent TV causing aggressive play. It could also be possible that aggressive play is causing violent TV. So, at this point you have two hypotheses. You have the same data can be used to talk about these two hypotheses. So, this is an example of what is called reciprocal causation. Both variables are causing each other to a certain extent. Okay. So, this one here is reverse causation. Aggressive play is causing people to watch violent TV. This scenario here is also possible, which is basically both variables are causing each other to a certain extent, which is what we are calling as reciprocal causation. Now, it could also be that there is a third variable which we have not considered. We have basically considered viewing violent TV, we have considered aggressive play. There could be a third variable that is commonly affecting these two. Okay. So, there could be a common causal variable as well, which is leading to such a pattern of results. Okay. So, common causal variables that are not part of the original research hypothesis can also produce these kind of effects, can also have a strong influence on your results and must be really cared for. Okay. So, in our example, it could be, as I was just mentioning a moment ago, that a potential common causal variable is the discipline style of the parents. For instance, parents who use a harsh discipline style may produce children who both like to watch violent television and like to play aggressively in the school playground, in comparison to children who have a relatively less harsh discipline style. Okay. So, it is probably the discipline style that is leading to both of these outcomes, but we have not factored this in. So, we do not know whether this is happening or not. We have to look for other ways to sort of figure out the causal relationship, or maybe put all three of them in a correlation matrix and try and understand what is happening, multiple regression for example. Okay. So, in this case, TV viewing and aggressive play would be positively correlated, even though neither one actually caused the other. So, the data can, in this sense, if you are not careful, can mislead you, and a lot of times you will see that people will pick one or two of the correlational coefficients and they will make an entire story out of it. You have to always try and present the full picture. So, it is also possible there could be another scenario where the predictor and the outcome variables are both caused by a common causal variable. This observed relationship, when this is happening because of a common causal variable, is said to be a spurious relationship. Okay, is a relationship that is spurious because neither of the two variables are actually causing each other. It is the third variable that is having an influence on both. In this case, if the effects of the common causal variable are taken away or controlled for, the relationship between the predictor and outcome variables might disappear altogether, because the third variable is controlled for. In our example, the one that we were just talking about, the relationship between aggression and TV viewing might be spurious, because if we were to control for the effects of parents' disciplinary style, the relationship between aggressive television viewing and aggressive behavior might just vanish. It is not there. All right. So, Here, if a common causal variable is operating, this would lead to a very different interpretation of the data, and especially if you are conscious of a common causal variable. A lot of times we miss these things in our research designs. Okay, you have to be very careful of not doing that. Okay, so the identification of the true cause of the relationship would also lead to a very different plan to reduce aggressive behavior and basically collect data in a particularly informed way. Now, when one reads about correlational research designs, one should keep in mind the possibility of reverse causation, reciprocal causation, spurious relationships, and so on. And this is something that is interesting, because a lot of times correlational research is reported as demonstrating causality without any mention being made of the possibility of reverse causation, common causal variable, and so on. So, informed students must be very careful of these interpretational problems. That is basically what I was trying to say in the last slide. What are the other problems? Common causal variable, reciprocal causation, reverse causation, all of that. There are also sometimes extraneous variables. Okay. So, while common causal variables are obviously quite problematic in the interpreting the correlations and can cause spurious relationships, correlational research designs sometimes also encounter other variables that were not in the original research design. You were not talking about them. Okay. For example, how aggressively a child plays at school may probably be caused by the disciplinary style of the child's teacher and not the parent. So, it could be the teacher who is making this influence. So, the TV watching at home is not creating the problem, it is this extraneous variable. So, if you are picking, for example, in this case, if you are picking for this comparison children from different classrooms whose class teachers are different and have different behavioral profiles, maybe that is causing this effect. You have controlled for parental style, maybe getting 2 or 3 children from the same household, but these children are in different classrooms. So, you have controlled for parental disciplinary style, but not for teacher disciplinary style. Maybe that is leaking into the results that you are observing. So, these variables that are possible, that are basically playing a role in predicting the outcome variable, but that do not cause the predictor variable, basically are defined as extraneous variables. So, this distinction between extraneous variables and common causal variables is very important, and we should keep this in mind, because they can lead to substantially different interpretations and a different story altogether. Extraneous variables may reduce the likelihood of finding a significant correlation between the predictor variable and the outcome variable, because they cause changes in the outcome variable. So, extraneous variables are actually a bit of a problem. However, because they do not cause changes in the predictor variable, extraneous variables cannot really produce a spurious correlation. They are affecting only one side of the thing. They are not changing the predictor variable, they are only changing the outcome variable. Look at this here. So, we have the predictor variable, viewing violent TV. We have the outcome variable, aggressive play. We know that there is possibility of reciprocal causation, that is why the double sided arrow. Here there is an extraneous variable that we did not account for, teacher's disciplinary style. This is not a common causal variable, it is not affecting both. It is just an extraneous variable because it is affecting from outside just the outcome variable. Okay. This is the best way to distinguish between a common causal variable and an extraneous variable, and must be kept in mind while interpreting the results of the correlation. There are also sometimes possibility of what is called mediating variables. Okay. So, sometimes while you are talking about variable A and variable C, how is variable A affecting variable C, that is the relationship of interest for you. It is possible that the relationship of A and C is being mediated by a B. Okay. So, there is a possibility that another type of variable can be important in correlational research design and is extremely relevant for gaining a full understanding of the relationship between these two, is called a mediating variable. Okay. So, for example, one might expect that the level of arousal of the child might also mediate the relationship between viewing violent material on television and displaying aggressive behavior. So, say for example, a child is watching violent TV, but the child by temperament, because that is what I said temperament earlier, by temperament is having low arousal, alright, is not extremely excitable and so on. So, if the child is not extremely excitable, maybe he will not translate into aggressive play. So, while viewing violent TV is going to have an effect on aggressive play, the degree to which that relationship will manifest might probably be determined by the mediating variable, that is arousal, alright. So, understanding mediating variables is also important. Our example, let us look at this is something that I already mentioned. It could be, there could be any number of mediating variables that you are seeing. Say for example, violent TV, aggressive play, fewer inhibitions. Children who have a lot of inhibitions might not engage in aggressive play at all. Children who have fewer inhibitions might engage in aggressive play. They want to compete, they want to push, they want to come first, they are not afraid of doing sometimes mean things and so on. So inhibitions also matter a lot. Similarly, violence related ideas, if they are exposed to violent related ideas, if they are coming up with those kind of ideas, so sometimes there are naughty kids in a colony that will keep coming up with innovative, slightly mischievous, maybe in some cases violent ideas. Okay, how do I trouble this guy? Oh, maybe I'll put a cracker in his in the exhaust pipe of his car or exhaust pipe of his bike or something like that. Okay, so violence related ideas, if there are extremely if the child is watched violent TV, he is not having these violent related ideas, may not translate into aggressive play. But if he is having too many of these violent ideas, this relationship might be magnified to a certain extent. All right. So mediating variables are important because they can explain why this relationship between two variables is occurring. So viewing violent TV and aggressive play. There are other examples also that we can take. Say for example, more study time, greater retention of material, better task performance. If somebody has an extremely good memory, if they have extremely good comprehending power, and then they are having more study time. Say for example, one of my friends has a very good memory. They spend, let's say 6 to 8 hours studying. If they do that and they have very good memory, they are all obviously going to do extremely well in their studies. Sometimes what happens is that there's greater retention of material is there, so somebody might have a lesser study time, and in that sense, or say for example very good retention of material is there, the study time might not have that much effect on. So even if you are studying for a small time, it may basically lead to better task performance by itself. So this capacity of retaining material can moderate the relationship between the amount of study time and the quality of task performance. Similarly, failure on a task, low self esteem, less interest in the task. Okay, if a person has high self esteem and sort of suffers failure in the task, he will probably try and take more interest in the task and maybe work harder. Or the other way around, low self esteem, oh I am not going to be able to do this, I failed the task anyways, the interest anyways sort of dips down further and further. So that is also possible. You can see there are different ways in which these mediating variables can actually mediate or moderate the relationship between the variables of interest. So viewing violent TV, aggressive play, failure on a task, less interest in the task, they are all potentially can be mediated by these variables that we were talking about. Now, we have been saying descriptive research designs do not talk about causality, they are not equipped to talk about causality. Correlational research designs cannot talk about causality. There are reasons we have talked about, the fact common causal variable, reverse causation, reciprocal causation, mediating variables, this and that, and because you are not you are collecting data out in the open, you are not controlling for any number of things. So obviously talking about causality becomes difficult, but it is not possible to conduct experimental research all the time across all kinds of target groups and so on. So you will see that correlational research is actually the next most popular type of research design that is used. So obviously descriptive research is done at the largest level. The next, it seems to me at least, I might be wrong, the next most popular research design is the correlational research design. Okay. So what can we do to optimize the the correlational research design to try and interpret causality, some kind of good estimate of causality, maybe not causality established, but something very close to that. Let us look at some ways. One is, in one of these research ideas given by Aaron and colleagues, the idea was that we want to establish this. So what they did was they conducted a longitudinal study. Okay. So the same individuals were measured more than one time, and the time period was kept such that the the changes in the variables of interest could actually happen. Okay. So they wanted to measure, Aaron and colleagues, violent television viewing and aggressive play in a group of children who were 8 years old. So first time they measured this, took out a correlation. Then they waited for almost 10 years to measure this again when the children were turned to 18 years old. Okay. So, same measurement at 8 years old and 18 years old, 10 years is a lot of time. All right. The resulting data was 2 sets of correlations and each measured at a different time period. Let us see what happens. What basically people would do here is that they will carry out what is called a path analysis. They will typically sort of analyze this through some kind of multiple regression that will assess the relationship among various variables that are in play here, and they basically will say over time the role of what variable has increased and decreased. Let's see this in a figure. Look at this. This is the path analysis of Aaron and colleagues study 1972. You can see TB violence causing aggressive play causing TB violence. You can see the relationship at when the kids were just 8 years old and the correlations when the kid were 18 years old. Okay. So, is aggressive play causing TB violence at the age of 8, 0.21, at the age of 8, and in the second measure 0.01. So, it sort of reduces over time, that does not remain the main factor. Similarly, when children are almost adults, there is no direct correlation, it is minus 0.05. So, it is a very weak negative correlation between aggressive play and TB violence. So, this kind of a path diagram tells us over time what are the effects between these different variables, and it basically allows us to see what kind of correlations will survive this test of time, and in that sense you can see that this causality that we were very confident about, positive linear relation that earlier studies had found, sort of gets tested and in that sense gets undervalued. It says, oh, this is not really the most important thing. Other two things are, say for example, you can try and control for common causal variables. That is why you can say, okay, if there is a disciplinary style of parents, if there is disciplinary style of teachers, something like that, you can. So, when you are designing your study, you have to be very careful, you have to be very aware of the possible causal variables, common causal variables that might be there, and control for them. Similarly, when you are designing these studies, you have to also assess the role of mediating variables. What kind of variables would play the part? What kind of variables are there? So, the better idea is that to factor in that variable in your design, find out a way of measuring it, find out a way of controlling for it if you want a better resolution. And once you have done both of these things, control for possible common causal variables and control for the role of mediating variables, that is where you are giving yourself, or you are optimizing the chances of, in some sense, optimizing the chances of determining, not really determining, but getting a causal estimate just based on your correlational studies. Okay. So, there are different ways, there is structural equation modeling, there are several ways in which people use correlational research, and they try and get as close to causal reasoning as possible, but again the gold standard is experimental research, which we will basically talk about from the next lecture. Thank you so much.